Okay, so picture this: my father shows up out of nowhere, demanding I leave my own home so my sisters-in-laws can stay in total luxury. I hand over the keys, smiling. But here's the twist. I didn't mention the hidden cameras I'd installed months ago. And then, just as they start rifling through my late mother's jewelry, the police show up. I know, right? It sounds insane, but trust me, this is just the beginning. You won't believe how everything unfolds from there. It was one of those days where everything hurt. My head was pounding, a migraine that had been hammering behind my eyes for what felt like forever. And my body was screaming at me to just lie down and forget the world. I was curled up on my oversized beige sectional, a heating pad draped over my shoulders, and a cup of chamomile tea steaming on the coffee table. I had survived a brutal 60-hour work week, and honestly, I just wanted to melt into the couch and disappear for a while. But of course, life had other plans. The front door banged open. I didn't even flinch at first. Only one person had the code to my smart lock, and the audacity to use it without knocking. My chest tightened, and I squinted against the light, trying to make sense of the sudden disruption. "Amelia, thank God you're home," came the voice, urgent, but it wasn't the kind of urgency that brought comfort. It was my father, Frank, and he had stormed into my living room like he owned the place, which, technically, he didn't. He was wearing that negotiation suit of his, the slightly shiny navy blue number he put on whenever he wanted to feel important or intimidate someone. And here's the thing: he didn't even ask how I was. Didn't notice the dark circles under my eyes, the way I winced at the volume of his voice. He just planted himself in the center of my open concept living room, hands on his hips, scanning everything with this critical, calculating gaze. "Dad," I croaked, my voice raspy, almost disappearing into the room. "I'm sick. Can this wait?" "No, it cannot wait," he snapped, dismissing my illness with a wave of his hand like it was some minor inconvenience, some trivial obstacle in the grand scheme of whatever he had planned. And then he started telling me about Maya, my younger sister, and the absolute chaos over a hotel reservation. Tears, hysteria, the works. Apparently, Richard and Joyce, her husband's wealthy parents, were arriving in 4 hours, and the world had apparently hinged on this minor scheduling disaster. My stomach knotted at the mention of those names. The illustrious in-laws, as I had come to think of them. Since Maya had married their son, Frank had been obsessed, like they were royalty or something. And to him, they were the old money, the important people, the pillars of the community, the sort of people whose approval could somehow validate the family in his eyes. I rubbed my temples, trying to fend off the migraine, trying to find a tiny corner of patience. "Okay," I said slowly. "So book them another hotel. The Hyatt is nice, right?" Frank looked at me like I had suggested they sleep in a dumpster. "The Hyatt, Amelia. Be serious. Richard and Joyce are used to a certain standard. They need space. They need luxury. They need..." He gestured vaguely around my living room, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Japanese maple garden I had designed myself. "They need this." I sat up straighter, the heating pad sliding off my shoulder. "Excuse me, your house. It's perfect. Modern, clean, impressive. It shows that our family has taste. I told them you'd be happy to host them for the weekend. You told them what..." I could feel my head spinning. my body fighting the fever and weakness. "Dad, I live here. I'm sick. I'm not running a bed and breakfast." "Don't be selfish, Amelia," he barked, face gleaming with that self-satisfied arrogance. "This is for your sister. You know how important it is for her to make a good impression. They bought her house, funded her lifestyle. If they see we can provide this kind of hospitality, it solidifies her position." My hands were shaking now, but not from the illness alone. Adrenaline laced every movement. Her position. "She's their daughter-in-law, not an employee," I muttered, barely holding myself upright. Frank wasn't done. Dropping the card he always played, he said, "You're single. It's just you and the cat. Go stay at my place or get a room at the Hyatt since you think it's so nice. I'll pay for it." He wasn't asking. He was demanding. He walked over to the kitchen island where my spare key fob usually sat in a decorative bowl, picked it up, weighing it like a trophy. "They land at 4, he said, checking his watch. "I need the place cleaned out, personal items hidden, fridge stocked with high-end stuff by 3. Cleaners are on their way." I looked at him, standing there in the home I had bought with my own money, built with my own career as a landscape architect, demanding I leave. No empathy, no acknowledgement of my illness, just expectation. A cold, hard knot formed in my chest, and I realized, with a sinking dread, this wasn't new. Frank had always prioritized Maya's image over my well-being, but something about this time felt different. He was already holding my keys before I had even said yes. I took a deep breath, forcing my muscles to relax. "Okay," I said softly. The calm in my voice seemed to shock him. Frank blinked, clearly not expecting compliance. "Okay, good girl. I knew you'd see reason." I turned toward the hallway, hiding the look of fury in my eyes, and said, "I'll pack a bag. I'll be out by 2. "Perfect," Frank said, already pulling out his phone to call Maya. "Make sure you leave instructions for the thermostat and the fancy coffee machine. Richard likes his espresso specific." I walked into my bedroom and closed the door. Hands trembling, I whispered to myself, "Sure, Dad, I'll leave instructions." The betrayal hit deeper than inconvenience. This wasn't just about hosting guests. This was an erasure of my boundaries, a blatant dismissal of everything I had built for myself. I paused, thinking of all the other times he had used my home, my career, my life as props for his ego. But this time, I didn't feel anger in the usual way. I felt a strange calm, suppressing the rage just long enough to plan what came next. For now, I was the compliant daughter, the one who left, but only because it was a step toward reclaiming control. And as I packed my bag, dragging it along the floor with deliberate slowness, I realized something important. Compliance doesn't mean weakness. It means patience, strategy. Frank had underestimated me, assuming that exhaustion and illness made me pliable. But I was more aware than he could ever know, and I wasn't about to let him or anyone else use that against me. I slipped out quietly, leaving the house as if I were merely a guest, masking the storm that had already begun to form inside me. I checked into a budget motel 3 towns over. Not the Hyatt, not even close. But it was perfect for what I needed, somewhere anonymous, sterile, quiet, somewhere no one could find me, and I could finally think straight. I sat on the stiff motel bed, laptop open, the glow of the screen the only light I allowed. The room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and stale cigarettes, but it didn't matter. Everything else faded. All I could focus on was the house. My house, the one I had built, and the people who thought they could just walk in and take what wasn't theirs. The cameras had been installed months ago, after Frank had come by while I was at work, borrowing some nonsense, snooping through my financial documents. I never confronted him. I didn't need to. That was the thing about careful planning. You see it coming before it happens. I placed the cameras strategically: living room, kitchen, hallways, and yes, even the master bedroom. The one in the bedroom was discreet, tucked between a row of hardcover books, aimed perfectly at the closet where I kept the safe. I knew every angle, every blind spot, every corner that could be exploited. I knew them better than they knew themselves. As I settled onto the bed, adjusting the laptop on my knees, I watched the feed load. The front door opened at exactly 4:15 p.m., just as Frank had said. My pulse jumped, but not with fear. It was anticipation, controlled, steady. He walked in first, carrying 2 massive Louis Vuitton duffel bags, a look of forced composure plastered across his face. I could see him checking corners, scanning the room, nervous energy radiating off him. Behind him, Maya appeared, immaculate as ever, dressed in cream cashmere, the picture of anxiety masquerading as elegance. And then, the in-laws. Richard, taking up more space than seemed physically possible, his tweed jacket almost costume-like, a cane he didn't need tucked under his arm. Joyce followed, sunglasses indoors, sharp and calculating. I felt a flicker of anger at the sheer audacity of it all. They were in my home, my sanctuary, and they didn't even know I was watching. But alongside the anger was a kind of calm, the quiet satisfaction of having prepared for this moment. I wasn't just sitting back helplessly. No, I was observing, collecting evidence, understanding their movements. It was strategy, pure and simple. I took a deep breath, letting the tension drain a bit as I watched them move through the living room. Each gesture, each glance captured in crisp 4K resolution. Frank was performing, of course, playing the perfect host, bending over backward to impress them. Every smile, every step. Calculated. He didn't notice the cameras, didn't suspect a thing. And I realized something important. This gave me power. Power to see the truth as it unfolded. Power to anticipate the next move. Power to protect what was mine. My fingers hovered over the trackpad, ready to zoom, to switch angles, to observe the closet where everything really mattered. The house felt alive in a way that was almost suffocating through the screen. The clink of glasses, the rustle of clothing, the almost imperceptible exchange of glances between Richard and Joyce. Every detail told me something. Every movement was a clue. I could feel the old familiar rage simmering beneath the surface, hot and white, but it was tempered by clarity. This was not impulsive. This was calculated. I was in control. I let myself watch, letting the fear and anger morph into anticipation. Richard and Joyce explored with this reckless confidence, as if my house was their playground, my mother's paintings, the layout I had spent years refining. The furniture I had chosen and curated, all of it was under their scrutiny. They didn't know the cameras were there, didn't know the story they were about to be caught in. And I watched, quiet, letting the thrill of being unseen wash over me. There was something intoxicating about that invisible vantage point. I could see them as they really were: opportunistic, entitled, confident in their unearned authority. My thoughts drifted, briefly, to past incidents with Frank. How he had barged in under the guise of borrowing something. How he had rifled through files and documents. How I had learned to secure my perimeter, to protect my life and my possessions without confrontation. That knowledge, that experience gave me a strange, cold comfort now. It was like every violation he had committed, every boundary he had crossed, had been a rehearsal for this moment. I knew the patterns, the moves, the intentions, all laid bare on my screens. Joyce's attention eventually drifted to the master bedroom. I saw her attempt the handle of the door, frown, and then turn back to Frank, who came with drinks in hand. Of course, Frank had the master key. He had kept the spare I gave him years ago. I had changed the locks, but not the interiors, and he had walked right in without question. My chest tightened, a blend of betrayal and satisfaction that I had anticipated this possibility. I didn't panic. I observed. I let the rage settle into calm clarity. I watched as Frank unlocked the door, proudly presenting it to Joyce like a gift. She swept inside, running her hands along the dresser, lifting a framed photo of my mother and me, taken just weeks before she passed. Her lips curled into a sneer. "Tacky," she muttered, placing it face down. Richard followed, closing the door behind him, hands wandering across the back wall of the closet. I leaned forward, eyes narrowing. This was exactly why the cameras were here, why I had prepared every detail. I could hear their conversation, crystal clear. Richard asking about valuables, Joyce orchestrating the search, Frank too eager to impress, too naive to recognize the danger he had invited into our home. They had no idea that every move was documented, every word recorded. I felt a wave of satisfaction wash over me, tempered with a sharp, white-hot rage at my father's complicity. And yet, amidst the fury, there was strategy. I stayed calm. I let them act. Let them reveal their true intentions. This was the moment where observation became power. I switched camera views, zoomed in on the bookshelf camera, and saw the safe in the corner, the one they were unaware of, the one that held the pieces that were my mother's legacy. My hands shook slightly, but not from fear, from anticipation. The storm was coming, and I was ready. I watched as they attempted to open the safe, their tool in hand, a small, consumer-grade device that I recognized instantly. My heart raced, but my mind stayed sharp. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. They had come prepared. They had brought the tools, but I had prepared too, in a way they hadn't accounted for. The safe clicked open. My mother's jewelry was exposed, glinting under the closet light. I felt a pulse of anger so strong it made my stomach tighten. They were robbing me, using my father, thinking I was gone, that I would never witness this. But I was there, watching every second, every motion, every ounce of their greed and entitlement, and I felt a cold and exhilarating clarity. I wasn't just the daughter they had dismissed. I was the witness. I was in control. I leaned back on the motel bed, letting the weight of the moment settle over me. The adrenaline buzzed, mingling with the residual illness, a cocktail of exhaustion and empowerment. I could see them, hear them, understand every facet of what they were doing, and I realized that watching, anticipating, documenting it wasn't passive. It was strategy. Quiet, deliberate, effective strategy. I stayed there for hours, observing every gesture, every word. Every subtle exchange became part of a map I was drawing in my mind. Richard and Joyce thought they were acting freely. Frank thought he was orchestrating a grand gesture of hospitality. But I was the unseen presence, the architect of observation, and the calm center in the middle of the storm of entitlement. I wasn't powerless. I was preparing, planning, and letting them underestimate me. Just like they always did. I watched, frozen to the motel bed, as Richard and Joyce moved through my home like they owned it. Every step, every glance, every movement was calculated, greedy, entitled. Frank hovered behind them, trying to look useful, eager to impress. And I realized with a sinking feeling that he had no idea what he'd unleashed. He had handed over the keys without a second thought, not even noticing my absence, my illness, my boundaries. And now, my worst fears were unfolding, pixel by pixel on my laptop screen. Richard ran his hands along the walls, inspecting the bookshelves, the furniture, lingering over the art pieces my mother had chosen with such care. Joyce circled, directing him with subtle gestures. A quiet commander in her designer sunglasses. It was horrifying to see, the way they coordinated, almost wordlessly, reading each other like partners in crime. And the audacity of it, right walking through my life, touching my things, as if my home were some open showroom. They were both glancing toward the closet in the master bedroom now. My chest tightened. That closet contained the biometric safe where I had kept the most important part of my mother's legacy. The jewelry that wasn't just valuable, it was her life, her memories, pieces she had collected painstakingly, thoughtfully. Each brooch, each locket, each strand of pearls was imbued with a story, and these vultures didn't care. They only saw gold, gemstones, opportunity. Joyce snapped her fingers toward the coats hanging in front of the safe. "Move them," she said, her voice sharp but almost casual. Richard shoved aside the cashmere coats, revealing the safe nestled behind, its digital keypad blinking quietly. My hands gripped the edge of the motel bed as if holding on would somehow let me intervene. But I couldn't touch a thing, couldn't step through the screen. All I could do was watch. Richard pulled a sleek device from his pocket, one of those solenoid bypass tools I knew too well. My jaw dropped. This wasn't just casual snooping. This was premeditated, deliberate. They had planned this, brought the tools, and my father, blissfully unaware, had facilitated the entire operation. I felt a surge of horror and rage so intense it made my stomach twist. Frank had literally opened the door for them, removed my protection without thinking. Every violation, every betrayal became crystal clear in that moment. The device whirred against the lock, and I saw the mechanism click. My mother's safe swung open like a trap, revealing the wooden box inside. My breath caught in my throat. The ruby pendant, the diamond bracelet, the pearls they glimmered under the closet light, untouched, yet exposed. And for the first time, I realized that the in-laws weren't just opportunistic, they were predators. They had come prepared to extract value from my family, from my mother's memory, and Frank had unwittingly been their accomplice. Joyce leaned in, her fingers brushing the velvet lining, assessing each piece with a practiced, almost clinical eye. Take the heavy pieces, she murmured, her greed barely contained. The ones that can be pawned quickly. Leave the cheap stuff. Richard's expression lit up with a gleeful smile as he grabbed handfuls of chains, bracelets, pendants. My chest heaved. I could feel my heart pounding, a mixture of adrenaline and revulsion. I wanted to scream, to throw myself into the screen, to stop them, but I had to stay calm. I had to watch. Every second of their actions was proof, documentation, leverage. They laughed quietly as they worked, a cruel, conspiratorial sound that seemed to echo through the empty motel room, reverberating against the walls, making my skin crawl. They didn't see me. They didn't suspect. But I knew. And that knowledge shifted something inside me, from fear to cold clarity. This wasn't just theft. It was an invasion, a calculated, premeditated violation facilitated by the very person who was supposed to protect me, who was supposed to protect our family. I felt my fingers tighten on the edge of the laptop, knuckles white, but my breathing slowed. The rage was still there, simmering, white hot, but it was focused now. I understood their motives, their methods, and even, heartbreakingly, Frank's enabling role. He wanted to impress, to participate, to be seen as generous and accommodating, and he didn't see that in doing so. He was erasing me, my boundaries, my mother's legacy. Every instinct screamed at me to act immediately. But the part of me that had survived countless manipulations, countless betrayals, kept me still. I needed to watch it all play out. I needed to see the full picture before I moved. Joyce reached into the wooden box, picking up the ruby pendant and holding it up to the light. Richard followed, lifting the diamond bracelet, inspecting it with a professional, almost meticulous eye. The pearls were tucked into small velvet pouches, and they divided the pieces quickly, efficiently, greed dictating their actions. They weren't careless, they were methodical. And as I watched, the initial horror melted into a cold, calculated awareness. This was what they had intended from the start. This was their plan. They had come for this, and Frank, in his obsession to impress, had delivered it. I could feel my breathing settle, my pulse slowing slightly as clarity replaced panic. I understood the hierarchy of control in the room now. Frank was the unwitting facilitator. Maya, completely under the spell of her husband's family, was an accessory only in appearance, and Richard and Joyce predators, exploiting every opening, every weakness, every human flaw for gain. And me, I was the witness, the one who could see everything unfold and retain control. The velvet pouches were filled, the contents assessed, the inventory complete. Richard snapped the device shut, and the safe door swung back into place. They stepped back, admiring the hall, chuckling quietly at their own efficiency. I exhaled, a long, deliberate release, almost as if I'd been holding my breath for hours, which, in a way, I felt both relief and a renewed surge of rage, the audacity, the entitlement, the sheer brazenness of it all, and Frank had enabled them every step of the way. I leaned back in the motel bed, running a hand through my hair, trying to steady the trembling that had returned. My body was weak. Yes, feverish from the stress, but my mind was razor sharp. I watched as they moved back into the living room. Frank, still playing the doting host, offering drinks, fetching glasses, fawning. They had no idea that their every move had been documented, that the truth of their greed was being captured with perfect clarity. Every smirk, every instruction, every quiet manipulation recorded, evidence that would leave them exposed. Joyce straightened, glancing around the living room with a calculating eye. "Well, at least the girl has taste," she murmured, voice low, just enough for Richard to hear. Richard nodded, fingers trailing along the polished furniture, scanning, evaluating. They were impressed with the material, but it was superficial. I knew what they truly valued, and it wasn't art or taste or beauty. It was value, wealth, leverage, and now they had it in their hands. Literally, my mother's legacy, a collection of memories and love, reduced to potential cash, and my father had handed it over willingly. I felt a pang of grief, sharp and immediate, but it was intertwined with clarity. I wasn't just angry. I wasn't just horrified. I understood. I understood the full depth of their opportunism, the meticulous cruelty of their intentions, and the naive, blind enabling by Frank. The betrayal wasn't subtle. It wasn't accidental. It was crystal clear, and I could see it all from my perch at the motel, unseen and untouchable. As they gathered themselves, preparing to leave the closet, I leaned closer to the laptop, watching each movement, every fold of clothing, every careful placement of the pouches, every whispered word was evidence. I had proof of intent, of premeditation, of deliberate theft, and the realization hit me hard. Frank hadn't just failed to protect me. He had actively facilitated this violation, blinded by ego, by his obsession with appearances, by his need to impress people who didn't care about him, or me, or the life we had built. Richard and Joyce finally stepped back from the safe, satisfied, smug. Frank was beaming, obviously thrilled at his role in this theatrical heist. Maya, still radiant, but anxious, was oblivious, swept along in the current of their manipulation. And I felt a cold and focused clarity wash over me. The rage that had burned in me moments ago was now tempered by purpose. Observation had become strategy. Witnessing had become control. I leaned back, exhaled, and allowed myself a moment to absorb the full weight of what had happened. This wasn't a random act. It wasn't a lapse in judgment. This was a deliberate, orchestrated attempt to seize what belonged to me and to my mother, and it had been enabled by the very person who was supposed to care for us. My heart pounded, not with fear, not with helplessness, but with the first spark of calculated response. The storm had begun, and I was ready to see it through. Every step, every betrayal, every calculated move, from the safety of my vantage point, my eyes and my cameras capturing every second. And I knew, in that quiet, tense motel room, that nothing would be the same again. I stared at the screen for a long moment, watching Richard and Joyce leave my closet with my mother's jewelry tucked into those velvet pouches. My hands were still trembling, but this time it wasn't fear. It was calculation, sharp and precise. I knew what had to happen next. I needed someone on the outside, someone who could act without alerting them, someone who could turn this mess into justice. And the only person I trusted was Detective Miller. I pulled out my phone, my fingers hovering over his contact. Hesitation only because I needed to make sure my words were exact. I couldn't afford a misstep. One wrong sentence, one slip, and the whole plan could collapse. My body felt the stress, my chest tight, muscles taut with anticipation, but my mind was clear, focused, ruthlessly focused. I dialed, counting the rings, listening to the line until a gruff, familiar voice answered. "Detective Miller," he said. "Detective, it's Amelia Vance," I said, voice steadier than I felt. My throat was tight, but I forced the words out. "I did the landscaping for the precinct last year. You gave me your card. Remember the Japanese maples?" There was a pause, and then his tone softened, recognition flickering through the line. "I remember, Ms. Vance, what's going on?" I exhaled, letting a fraction of tension escape. "Everything's fine, well, not fine. It's complicated. They're inside my house right now. My father let them in. They're my sisters-in-laws, but they're breaking into a safe. They're taking my mother's jewelry." I heard him shift on the other end of the line, the professional gears clicking into place. "Complicated how?" I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to remain calm. "They've entered the locked master bedroom and bypassed the biometric safe. They've got a device that opens the lock. They're stealing items valued at over $80,000. My heart was hammering, but I didn't let it falter my tone. I had to stay in control. Every word counted. There was silence, the kind of pause that makes your stomach turn over. I could hear him thinking through the logistics, the legality, the timing. Finally, he said, "You said your father let them in." "Yes," I said, a hard edge in my voice. "He thinks they're guests. He has no idea what's happening. But I've got video evidence. It's all recorded." A low whistle came from the line. "Absolutely breaking and entering, plus grand larceny, given the value. Can you send me the footage?" I clicked through my files, clipped the exact segment of video showing Richard manipulating the device, Joyce directing him, Frank blissfully unaware, and sent it over. Every frame was crystal clear. Every word they whispered, every gesture captured. I could feel the weight of the evidence in my chest, cold but empowering. Miller's voice came back, low and steady. "I got it. That's damning. The device they used, illegal to possess without a locksmith license. We could pick them up right now." I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. "No, not yet. They're here for the weekend. If we arrest them now, they'll claim it was a misunderstanding. My father will back them up. I need them to complete the crime. I need them to sell the items. Then, we make the arrest." There was a pause on the line. "You want to wait for them to fence the goods?" Miller asked, caution in his tone. I pressed my lips together, calculating the timing. "Yes. I want zero doubt. I want them to go to a pawn shop, hand over the jewelry, get cash. Only then do we strike. That way, no one can question the charges." He hesitated, then agreed reluctantly. "Fine, but keep me updated, every hour. If those items move, I need to know. You'll be the first call." "I promise," I said, and I hung up. The phone heavy in my hand, I exhaled slowly, letting the adrenaline recede a little, but I didn't relax completely. No, I couldn't. There was work to do, timing to consider, observation. Everything had to be precise, every action deliberate. I spent the rest of Friday night glued to the feed. I watched them drink my wine, critique the art, sleep in my bed. It was a violation so profound it made my skin crawl, but I couldn't look away. Every movement, every conversation, every smirk became part of a larger pattern, a blueprint for the evidence I needed. I felt the cold thrill of control settle over me. I wasn't just a witness. I was orchestrating the trap, even if they didn't know it. Saturday morning, the movement began early. "We're going for a drive, Frank," Richard announced. "Check out the local scenery," he said. And my father, eager to please, offered the Mercedes in the driveway. "Lovely," Joyce purred, sliding into the passenger seat. I watched them pull away on the driveway camera, noting every detail, every gesture. As soon as they were gone, I opened the tracking app on my phone. The little blue dot moved steadily down the highway, heading straight for the city center. My heart thrummed in my chest, but the panic was gone, replaced by focus. Precision. I grabbed my keys, hoodie, and sunglasses and got in my car. I wasn't going to intervene physically. I just needed to see it, to follow, to confirm the path, the intent, the culmination of their plan. I trailed them at a safe distance, 3 cars back, keeping my headlights dim, my breathing measured. They didn't go to a museum or a park. They pulled into a strip mall, a gritty part of downtown, parking in front of Gold and Silver Exchange. My stomach flipped, anticipation coiling like a spring. I parked across the street, camera lens trained on them, and watched Richard get out. He patted his jacket pocket, the movement casual but loaded with intent. Joyce stayed in the car, adjusting her makeup in the visor mirror. 20 minutes inside the shop. 20 minutes that felt like an eternity to me, glued to the screen, counting every second. And then he came out, walking lighter, the envelope in his hand. Joyce opened it, fanned out the bills, kissed him on the cheek, and my blood ran cold. They had done it. They had actually sold the jewelry. Every piece of my mother's legacy, converted into cash. I snapped a photo through the phone, capturing the triumphant, entitled smirk on their faces. And then, quick and deliberate, I dialed Miller. "They've sold it," I said, voice steady. "Gold and Silver Exchange on 4th Street, receipt signed, cash in hand." Miller's tone went grim. "We'll send someone to secure the items immediately. Warrant ready for tomorrow morning. Sunday brunch. That's when we move." Perfect. Timing was everything. I exhaled, letting the tension ease slightly. But my mind stayed alert. Every piece of evidence, every move I made had to be perfect. One misstep could let them slip through. But I had control now. A careful, deliberate control. And the knowledge, the certainty that they had overstepped, that they had exposed themselves fully, made my pulse steady. I could see everything. I could anticipate everything, and I was ready to act. I watched from a safe distance as Richard and Joyce parked in front of the pawn shop. My phone was in my hand, tracking the little blue dot that represented them. A tiny moving signal of everything they had just done to my family. My heart was pounding, but not out of fear. This was the moment, the culmination of days of planning and observation. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and tension, like standing on the edge of something inevitable. Richard got out first, the envelope heavy in his hand. Joyce stayed behind, glancing in the visor mirror, checking herself with practiced perfection. They had no idea I was watching, no clue that their every move was being monitored, logged, documented. The audacity was breathtaking, but I reminded myself to stay calm. Every step mattered. Every reaction I had to make now had to be deliberate. Through the camera on my laptop, I watched him enter the shop, the door closing behind him with that tiny, decisive click. My pulse quickened. This was it. The transaction, the exchange, the proof I needed. I zoomed in, adjusted the angle. I could see the teller behind the counter, a quick exchange of hands, a stack of bills. Richard's expression was smug, triumphant, and I felt it pure, cold satisfaction. The evidence was undeniable. They had done it, and I had captured every second. Joyce leaned back in the car, flipping through the money, counting it with precise, greedy care. I could practically see the glee radiating from her in waves, and I had to suppress a small shiver. It was infuriating, the confidence with which they moved. Like this was routine, like they had no fear of consequence. But I knew better. I had all the control now. I had the evidence, the timing, the plan, and I was ready to see it through. As Richard came back to the car, cash secured, Joyce stuffed it into her purse. I pulled up a message to Detective Miller. One call, clear. Concise, they've completed the transaction. He understood immediately. The tone of his voice, low, serious. We had to wait for Sunday brunch. That's when the arrest would happen. Timing, patience, strategy, every element had to align. I leaned back in my motel chair, letting a slow breath out. The adrenaline buzzed faintly in my veins, but I could feel the calm underneath. I watched them drive away, following the dot on my tracking app as it moved back toward the city. Each turn, each stop, was like a beat in a symphony I was conducting from a distance. I had orchestrated this entire setup in my mind, step by step, and now I was watching it unfold in real time. I reviewed the video again, frame by frame, making sure everything was captured perfectly. Every movement, every word, every subtle gesture from Frank, Richard, and Joyce was recorded. I could anticipate how the brunch would go, how Frank would react, how the in-laws would behave when confronted. I mapped it all out mentally, rehearsing responses, imagining their shock, imagining the moment when the truth would land with full impact. It was a strange combination of tension and satisfaction, knowing that justice was imminent, but also knowing you had to wait, that the plan was delicate, that one misstep could ruin everything. I sipped my water, keeping myself steady, eyes on the screen. They had made their move. They had exposed themselves fully. And I had the proof. Everything was falling into place. By the time the car disappeared from view, I had every detail committed to memory, every step accounted for, every element of timing calculated down to the second. Sunday brunch was set, the officers would be ready, Detective Miller would coordinate, and I would be there, calm, controlled, and fully prepared. I felt the quiet satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed, the thrill of anticipation for the confrontation, and a deep, personal sense of empowerment. This was my moment, my strategy, my victory just beginning, and I wasn't going to let anything go wrong. I parked down the street, just far enough to stay unseen. The unmarked police cruisers were already idling around the corner, dark sedans with faint, watchful headlights. My heart thumped, but it wasn't panic this time. It was anticipation, control, a strange, calm satisfaction that I'd been waiting for. I adjusted my black blazer, my tailored trousers, heels clicking sharply against the asphalt, and reminded myself, stay calm. Timing was everything. I walked up the driveway, gravel crunching under my heels. Laughter floated out of the open windows, oblivious, unaware, and that made my chest tighten. Inside, Frank was mid-toast, glass of champagne raised high, smiling at the in-laws as if the world was normal. Richard leaned back in my velvet armchair like he owned the place. Joyce was picking at a croissant, radiating entitlement. Maya, my sister, in a floral dress, clung to her husband's arm, smiling but tired, caught in the middle of something she didn't fully understand. And I was the eye of the storm. I stepped into the archway. Silence hit instantly. He froze mid-toast. The room, bright and sunlit, felt like it contracted around me. "Amelia," Frank sputtered, lowering his glass, a color draining from his face. "What are you doing here? I told you we were having a private family brunch. You weren't invited." His voice wavered, betraying a mixture of shock and fear. "It's my house." "Dad," I said, calm, measured. My voice carried naturally across the room, effortless but heavy. "I don't need an invitation. You have some nerves showing your face after the stunt you pulled." Joyce's eyes snapped to me, outrage sparking instantly. "Spying on us, trying to frame us with fake videos," she hissed, standing, her posture rigid, ready to confront. Frank's shoulders slumped slightly, caught between disbelief and desperation. "Frank, get her out of here." Joyce snapped, her voice sharp, but I raised a hand and they froze. Timing, control my mantra. I reached into my purse, pulling out a folded document. Calm, deliberate, like every move had been rehearsed, every word counted. "I'm here to clarify a few things," I said, voice cutting clearly through the tension. "Starting with the fake video. We know it's fake," I stated, eyes sweeping over Richard and Joyce, their faces twisted, a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Frank told us everything," Richard boomed, face flushing red. "She's jealous. She's trying to destroy your sister's happiness because she's a lonely, bitter spinster." Maya's eyes filled with confusion and hurt, glancing between me and her husband. I didn't flinch. I kept control, letting the truth unfold without my emotions undermining the weight of the evidence. "Amelia, how could you, making up lies about Richard stealing? Does he buy you things with money he borrowed from Dad? Or worse?" I asked, voice calm, sharp, cutting. "Money he stole from dead people." The room shifted, the air heavy with tension. Frank slammed his hand on the table, trying to regain composure. "That's enough, get out now, or I'm calling the police." I nodded, as if on cue, almost serene. "Don't worry, Dad, I already called them. They're here." The front door opened. Not a family member this time. Detective Miller stepped in, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. The room went deathly silent. Richard's face drained of color. Joyce dropped her croissant, eyes wide. "Richard Sterling, Joyce Sterling." Miller asked, voice firm, professional. "Who are you?" Richard demanded, attempting to muster bluster, but it fell flat. "This is a private event." "Frank, do something," Joyce hissed, but the gravity of the situation was setting in too fast. Miller raised his badge. "Detective Miller, Major Crimes. I have warrants for your arrest on charges of grand larceny, breaking and entering, and trafficking in stolen goods." The words landed like stones. Silence fell. Maya whispered, "Stolen goods." Her voice small, shaky, eyes flicking to Richard. "What stolen goods?" Miller signaled to one officer who placed a clear evidence bag on the dining table. Inside glittered the ruby pendant, diamond bracelet, and pearls my mother's jewelry. The items they had sold, stolen from our family, recovered. "We have surveillance footage of Mr. Sterling selling them at 10:23 yesterday. Receipt signed by him, and the cash, $3,000 found in Mrs. Sterling's purse. Miller continued, precise, leaving no room for doubt. Frank's face went slack. He recognized the pendant immediately. Bought it for Mom on their 10th anniversary. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "It's a mistake," he stammered, helpless. Joyce shrieked, retreating. "It's a misunderstanding. We were taking them to get cleaned." As a surprise for Amelia, Miller, firm, unwavering, shook his head. "You pawned them for cash to pay off an overdue bridge loan threatening foreclosure on your property in Florida. We know about the lawsuits, the debts, the fraud. We know everything." Maya's voice trembled. "Debts? You said we were rich. You said the house was paid for." Her eyes filled with tears as the reality crashed over her. Richard tried to explain, stammering, "Baby, it's complicated. Temporary liquidity issues, assets tied up." But it sounded hollow, desperate. I stepped forward, calm and steady. 3 judgments totaling over $2 million. "Frank, they lied to you. They were using you to get to me, to get to Mom's jewelry." I let that sit in the air, the weight of the truth pressing on everyone. Richard lunged for the door, desperate, panicked. "Grab him!" Miller shouted. Officers tackled Richard before he could make 3 steps. Glass shattered as champagne splashed into the rug. Joyce screamed as she was cuffed, her entitlement parading into panic and confusion. The room emptied fast, leaving silence that was almost deafening. Maya stood frozen, tears streaming down her face, staring at the empty space where her husband had been. Frank slumped into a chair, burying his face in his hands. And I walked over to the table, picked up the evidence bag, holding my mother's legacy close. "I'll take this back now," I said, softly, resolute. Maya looked up at me, whispering. "I didn't know." "I know," I said, voice gentle but firm. "But you should have listened." The reality of the betrayal, the exposure, the consequences settled over the room. Richard and Joyce were arrested, Frank humbled, Maya shocked, and I, finally, in control, reclaiming what had been stolen, asserting the truth, and delivering justice. Every move, every word, every observation had led to this. And for the first time, the balance of power had shifted, definitively, irrevocably. The house was quiet for the first time in what felt like months. The chaos, the laughter, the betrayal, it was over. I had reclaimed my mother's jewelry, every single piece, safely returned to the biometric safe where it belonged. Holding the evidence bag, I felt a weight lift. Not just the physical weight of the gold, the pearls, and the rubies, but the emotional weight of violation, of having my boundaries ignored, of having my mother's legacy threatened. I finally exhaled, letting myself feel the relief, the justice, and the quiet triumph. Maya stood beside me, shaken, processing everything. The glow of realization softened her face. She finally understood the truth, what she had believed about Richard and Joyce. What she had trusted was all a lie. Her golden dream had been built on deception and greed, and now she was confronted with the reality. Tears streamed down her cheeks. But they weren't just for shock, they were for understanding, for the betrayal finally unveiled. She looked at me with something like awe, a recognition that I had seen the truth, had acted to protect what was ours, and had been right all along, and I felt a tender swell of protectiveness, not just for my mother's memory, but for Maya too. We'd been underestimated, dismissed. But now we had clarity. Frank sat quietly, a different man than the one who had barged into my house demanding obedience and complicity. His negotiation suit was gone. He wore a simple cardigan, subdued, his shoulders slumped, his eyes red from shame, the weight of his mistakes evident. "Amelia," he said softly, not looking up, not trying to justify or deflect. I don't know what to say. I met his gaze, firm but calm. "Start with, 'I'm sorry,'" I suggested, sitting opposite him. It was a simple request, but it carried the weight of accountability, something he had long avoided. He nodded, voice hoarse, admitting his misjudgment. I was so caught up in what they represented, in the idea of status, of being part of that world. I wanted Maya to be safe, to impress, and I lost sight of what mattered. I let them in. I let them take advantage. "You wanted status, Dad," I said, clear and unwavering. "And you were willing to sacrifice my safety and my home to get it." He nodded, silent, finally absorbing the truth. And I knew he would learn, in time, that respect and family were not measured by the approval of strangers. I set boundaries, firm and non-negotiable. The locks were changed. The alarm codes were reset. The jewelry stayed secure in the bank vault. And for the first time, I felt the calm that comes from true control. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was leading, protecting, and reclaiming what mattered. Maya was still processing, but I could see it, her transformation from naive trust to cautious understanding. The recognition that appearances could be deceiving, that manipulation could be subtle, but that truth always had a witness. I promised to help her through the legal steps, the annulment, the emotional recovery, but on my terms, not my father's, not anyone else's. We were taking back our power, our agency, piece by piece, and it felt exhilarating. I finally went back to my home, my sanctuary. The cameras still ran, though now they were a silent reassurance, not a weapon. I opened the safe, lifting out the ruby pendant. It felt cool, heavy, tangible, a connection to my mother, to her memory, to the strength she had imparted. I fastened it around my neck, feeling a surge of resolve, of continuity, of reclaiming what was ours. We had survived their manipulation, their audacity, and come out stronger, clearer, and unbroken. The important people were no longer threats. They were consequences in motion, and we were ready. I sat back, letting the quiet of my house wash over me, reflecting on the events that had unfolded. There was empowerment in seeing injustice and having the means, the patience, and the strategy to correct it. There was closure in reclaiming what had been taken, in watching the manipulators face accountability. And there was satisfaction in knowing that I had not only protected my mother's legacy, but also preserved the truth, the dignity, and the boundaries that mattered most. So, if you're still watching, here's the takeaway. Vigilance, strategy, and calm clarity can turn chaos into control. And if you found this story compelling, hit like and subscribe so you can follow more moments where justice, patience, and persistence change the game. Because sometimes the most important victories are the ones you quietly orchestrate, and it's worth sharing the journey as it unfolds.